We have now reached the place in our discussion of these issues where we need to look at how this all relates to the Bible. Can we reconcile biblical revelation with scientific discoveries? If we go back 200 years, we can see that most people in Europe and America had a great respect for the Bible. In fact, our Western civilization was founded on Christianity, and much of the Bible was also accepted as authoritative by Judaism and Islam. In the first verse of the Bible, we have the majestic words, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." However, the amazing escalation in knowledge brought about by our scientific age has led many to place much of the Bible into the category of myth. This destruction of confidence in the Bible has directly led to a dramatic decline in Christianity in Europe and America. The most devastating attack has come against the first book called Genesis, in which we read about the creation and God's role in bringing it into existence. Some people of faith have reacted to this by fighting against some of the discoveries made by science. This is most unfortunate, since it is in fact possible to reconcile scientific discovery with the Bible. All we have to do is to look again at some of our traditional interpretations. We are now going to look at how to reconcile the Bible with scientific discoveries. We will look at the first chapter of Genesis, and we will also need to look at the biblical description of a great flood. We will discover that this flood was limited in extent and certainly did not cover the whole world. This study requires us to be prepared to set aside what we may have been taught and to look at the evidence with an open mind. It is also so important for schools to teach pupils to question and reason logically. Too often, students are not taught to question and reason for themselves. This failure to teach reason and logic was a characteristic of Middle Ages Europe and led to centuries of stagnation that we call the Dark Ages. It was only after the Renaissance and Reformation that people were encouraged to think originally. From this atmosphere of intellectual freedom and inquiry, the amazing discoveries of our scientific and technological civilization arose. A correct understanding of the Bible book of Genesis requires us to look at the original documents written in Hebrew. This is because many Hebrew words have several legitimate meanings. The scholars who translated the Hebrew into other languages have often had long debates over the best translation. In practice, they chose the translation that seemed to best blend with other knowledge at the time that the translation was made. It is possible to make better translation choices. By doing this, we find that the description of creation in Genesis chapters 1 and 2 can be harmonized with the broad sweep of scientific discovery. These documents were written long before the scientific age, and yet, if understood correctly, are in harmony with all of our present-day knowledge. That statement may surprise you, but allow me to take you step by step through my reasoning. The Hebrew word for day is yom. This same word yom is used in at least 4 very different ways in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. In chapter 1 verse 4, God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light portion day, or yom, and the darkness he called night. The word yom is here used to denote that part of an earth day when the sunlight is visible, approximately 12 hours. At the end of each creative day in the Genesis account, we read, "And there was evening and there was morning, the first day, yom." In like manner, there are references to the second day, the third day, etc. In these cases, the word yom seems to be used to describe a period from evening to morning. Is this 12 hours overnight, or does it refer to a complete earth day, or does it have an even wider meaning? Certainly, it is a different use of the word yom than was previously used to describe the light portion of the day. In chapter 2, the original Hebrew text again uses the word yom. Most modern Bible translations have obscured the correct meaning of this passage. The King James translation into English is the most accurate rendering of the original Hebrew. In verse 4, we read, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day, yom, that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, and every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. Here, several of the days of creation seem to be summarized in one long sentence, and it all took place in one day, Yom. Another interesting comment on the word Yom is that the seventh day is not closed off in the same way as the preceding six. The phrase, the evening and the morning, is used at the end of each of the first 6 days, but the seventh day is not ended in this way. This suggests that the seventh day is still operating. We are living within the seventh day. The word Yom is also used in the narrative describing the temptation of Adam and Eve. Again, many modern translations obscure the original Hebrew. The King James translation again gets it right. God said to Adam, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day, Yom, that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." This use of the word Yom seems to denote a single earth day. Clearly the word Yom is very flexible in meaning. In fact, other accepted Hebrew meanings for the word include time, times, age, and season. These other meanings of the word Yom are used in the translation of other parts of the Bible from the original Hebrew. Young's Analytical Concordance of the Holy Bible states that the word Yom is used to denote a period of time in 65 places in the Bible. In its plural form, it is used as age 6 times, as year 5 times, and as years 4 times. In other Bible passages, it is emphasized that God is independent of time. For instance, in Psalm 90 we read, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night." Here the writer is not suggesting that God's days are 1,000 years long by our time standard. In fact, he is saying that time is almost irrelevant, like a day or even an hour of sentry duty when it has passed. The relevant point is that God plans and brings his plans into being. The time taken to achieve this is hardly worth a mention to a being who is independent of time and who lives in the eternal now. A further consideration is to compare the 6th creative day in Genesis chapter 1 with the Garden of Eden description of the creation of Adam and Eve in chapter 2. In chapter 1 we read that God created mankind, both male and female. Then we are told that this was the climax of God's creation and the end of the 6th day. However, in chapter 2 we have a description of events that covers a period of many days between the creation of Adam and the creation of Eve. We read that after God created Adam, he employed him to take care of the Garden of Eden, and he instructed him to give names to the animals and the birds. We read, "So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds of the air, and all the beasts of the field." This process alone must have taken many days to accomplish. It was only after this lengthy process that God formed Eve and brought her to Adam. Clearly, all these biblical references force us to admit that the word Yom is used in many different ways, not just a 24-hour day. It is fully justified to accept an interpretation such as an age of time or a long creative period. I suggest a legitimate translation of Genesis chapter 1 that is in harmony with acceptable meanings of the Hebrew words and in harmony with science could be as follows. "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Regarding the earth, it was initially formless and empty of life, and darkness covered the surface of the ocean, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Allow light to appear,' and light came to be. God saw that the light was good and beneficial, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light portion day, Yom, and the darkness portion he called night. Thus the end or evening of the first age, Yom, came, and the dawning of a new age, Yom, began. And God said, 'Allow a space to develop between the waters of the ocean and the waters of the clouds.' So God made the clear atmosphere between the ocean and the cloud cover, and it came to be so. God called the atmosphere sky. Thus the evening of the second age, Yom, came, and the dawning of a new age, Yom, began. And God said, 'Allow the waters under the atmosphere to be gathered to one place, and allow dry ground to appear,' and it came to be so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Allow the land to produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it came to be so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Thus the evening of the third age came, and the dawning of a new age began. I will not go right through each of the 6 Yom created periods in the narrative. However, I must further point out that in several places words are used that suggest processes. For instance, in verse 11, "Then God said, allow the land to produce vegetation." And in verse 20, "Allow the water to teem with living creatures." Then we read the words, "And it was so." In fact, a closer translation of the original Hebrew would read, "And it came to be so." Both descriptions are most suggestive of processes initiated by God to fulfill His plans for the earth. Some other biblical references suggest processes involved in creative acts of God. The prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah 42, "This is what God the Lord says, He who created the heavens and stretched them out." Very similar words are used in Psalm 104 verse 2 and Isaiah 44:24 and 40:22. Also Jeremiah 10:12 and 51:15, and in Zechariah 12:1. We could hardly find a better description of the Big Bang creation and the resulting stretching out of the universe. When we look at the history of our planet from a scientific perspective, we can see that the order of events recorded in Genesis is very similar to what science says, provided we allow some flexibility in the translation of some of the Hebrew words. Such flexibility is fully justified since the Hebrew words often have several legitimate meanings. The Genesis account clearly states that the evolution of our earth led to a water-covered planet. Until relatively recently, scientists believed that the early earth was not covered with oceans. However, more recent models of planetary formation lead to the conclusion that it could have been totally covered with ocean before the processes of plate tectonics started to push up sections of the ocean floor. In some other places in the account, it is essential to consider legitimate alternative translations of the Hebrew words. For instance, in verse 14 we read that on the 4th day God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark the seasons and days and years, and let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." And it came to be so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. Some critics have pointed out that the sun, moon and stars would have existed long before this time on earth. Yes, that is true, but the Hebrew word used here for made is actually asa. It can be translated as appointed to their function. In fact, this Hebrew word is translated in many different ways in other parts of the Bible. According to Young's Analytical Concordance, these other meanings include commit, bring forth, execute, keep, bestow, in addition to made. It is important to realize that the whole Genesis account is given from an earth perspective, as if viewed by a hypothetical observer on earth at the time. If we accept that the word translated as made is intended to mean appointed to their functions, then I take this section to refer to the stage in the Earth's evolution when breaks appeared more often in the dense cloud cover. A theoretical observer on the Earth would now see these heavenly bodies for the first time. They were now potentially available for use in determining times and seasons. They could now be appointed to that function, not only for mankind, but also for initiating and controlling biological rhythms, breeding seasons, migration, and a wide variety of other life processes in plants and animals. Biologists know that most living creatures rely on movements of the sun, moon, or stars to initiate many aspects of behavior. If we summarize the recorded events in each creative age, we find there is no attempt in the Genesis account to give details of which living organisms came first. Genesis gives only a broad survey of the increasing complexity of life over time. However, It correctly states that the first forms of life were plants, followed by sea creatures and flying creatures, followed by land animals, and finally by man. We also need to keep in mind that the translators of the original Hebrew into English have selected one legitimate translation out of several, and some of these choices may be misleading. For instance, in verse 20, "And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds," Hebrew word "off," "fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." Zoologists point out that, as far as we know, birds did not appear in the fossil record until after land animals. However, the original Hebrew word, translated in our English Bibles as birds, can also refer to flying creatures. If we take this reference to mean the abundant flying insect life of that period, including giant insects, then the order of life appearing in the Genesis account is again very close to that so far revealed by science. There is no doubt that the Genesis account stands out as unique among all other creation accounts. Its uniqueness is shown by its monotheism, its similarity in broad detail to scientific discovery, and its inbuilt historical details that are confirmed by science, including the approximate order in which life appeared on Earth. The biblical date for Adam is correctly placed in the Neolithic age through references to agriculture, cities, the first organized religion, and metal smelting. The geographic location of the Garden of Eden is confirmed through genetic studies of the first domesticated food crops. Although it was not written as a scientific document, the Genesis account can be reconciled with what is known from science. It is totally illogical to suggest that this account was derived from the Sumerian or other highly mythological accounts prevailing in early cultures. Logic dictates that the Sumerian accounts are distorted versions of the earlier biblical one, and that the biblical one was possibly originally written down by Adam himself using cuneiform writing on clay tablets. Archaeology confirms cuneiform writing was used from at least 3000 BC and probably earlier. When Moses compiled the book of Genesis many centuries later, he could have had access to Adam's account in the libraries of Egypt. The main aim of the Genesis account is to state that God is the originator of all things. How he achieved this and the time taken is apparently hardly relevant to the writer. The account does allow for great periods of time, provided we accept that the Hebrew word yom has several legitimate meanings, and that yom is in fact used in at least 3 entirely different ways in the Genesis account. May I remind you that much more detailed discussions of these subjects is available from my webpage, factandfaith.co.za. This gives extensive free downloads and information about my books on these subjects.